parties where you all just do this amazing work together. And can you talk about utilizing Shakespeare in genre? Because I think it's fascinating how it's Shakespeare. I've talked to a lot of actors about this, and they utilize Shakespeare as like the building blocks of everything. And especially with some of these works like Star Trek and Doctor Who, even Torchwood, we were talking about, it's neat how they utilize it into that with building blocks.
Yeah. In Shakespeare, like there is nothing, the words are everything. Like when you do a modern text, there is what's called subtext. So you might say good morning to someone, but what you're really saying is, you know, but in Shakespeare that's not true. In Shakespeare, if it's on the page, that is what the character's thinking. The character's thinking nothing beyond that. But Shakespeare, he's kind of like Picasso. Like Picasso will give you the profile of a figure, 3/4, front. Picasso's so weird because like there's 7 heads on the thing. So he's giving you all of that in one image, and Shakespeare's kind of the same way. So Shakespeare will take one moment between two people, and he'll just explore that one moment. There'll be a whole lot of language about that one thing, and so there's just nothing beyond that. And one of the tricks of Shakespeare is learning to use words as a cudgel, or use words as a lure. Come here. And you have to be really careful of that, of those tools when you go to TV, because TV will catch you acting, and the trick of film acting is actually to fool yourself into doing something that you didn't plan on, or something that you're not aware that you're doing, because the camera actually wants to document a real event. It really doesn't actually want acting. So I was saved by the fact that I was playing a vampire, because I hadn't learned this yet. And my first scene on Buffy, like, you were there. You can tell I'm just acting up a storm. I know that the character's supposed to land in the scene, and so I take a stage entrance, which is the upstage was the frame of a door, and it's obvious on stage. You pause in the frame of the door so that you're framed, and you say your first line, then you pause, then you start moving downstage and continue talking. It's just a classic stage and powerful stage entrance. And you speak loudly so that all eyes come up. So it's, you were there, like that. Well, I have a microphone strapped to my chest, right? They're going to cut to a close-up of the character. They're not going to see the frame. The camera's going to do all the work, and I didn't realize. To this day, when I see that scene, I'm just like, oh my God. So much acting going on. And it took me a while to realize that these younger actors were just eating me alive because they were believable, And I went to the school of Anthony Head. He is so subtle, and he's so real, and he's English, and he's a stage actor, and he made the transition. You could tell that he had all the tools, but he knew when to use them and when not to use them. So I would just sit on a box, even if I wasn't called that day, and I just stare at Anthony all day, and it's like, what? How does he do that? Because it looks like he's doing nothing. When I first had my first scene with Anthony, I was like, I'm going to eat you alive, man. Like, do you need a cup of coffee, old man? And then the scene came out, and he ruled me. Like, there was no need to look at the vampire. Like, this librarian is the interesting guy. But with that said, when you're playing, especially a villain, or especially a vampire who's like an iconic character, you can pull out a few of those tools sometimes and start to use words as a cudgel, and that helps. Yeah.
Thank you for the lesson. That's pretty amazing.
Talked a lot more than I thought.
We don't mind. We don't mind.
We don't mind at all. So my next question for you, kind of piggybacking off of that, is you've done a lot of voice work, audiobooks and things like that. So as an actor, like you said, that you had an issue, you know, learned to draw it in. But when you're doing voice work, it's just you in a booth. And how do you work that? And also, I know with audio work, when you're filming something, like for like a cartoon or something like that, is there a difference between doing that and doing a book that's never been filmed?
Well, like, when you do a book, like, okay, when you do stage, which is where I come from, your body is this big to the audience, because they're far away from you. Your face is that big, and your eyes are pretty much invisible. So, really, your job is to hang words in the air to tell the story. And I realized pretty quickly when I was doing audiobooks that that's exactly what I was doing. Like, my face is invisible. It's the same thing. So it was basically, oh, I get to pull a toolbox out and tell the story. With cartoons, you have to follow the animators. You know, there is still a lot going on visually, but you're not in control of it at all. So, like, you know, in film and television, there is a lot going on visually, but I'm creating that. With animation, you are not creating that, and you have to know what they're creating and kind of fit into that. I remember I did a Superman TV movie called Doomsday, where I played Lex Luthor. And one of the scenes is he's trying to seduce Lois Lane. And I thought I would play him kind of like a perverse Hugh Hefner. I thought that would be interesting. And not go arch at all. Not try to be villainous Lex Luthor at all, but just really try to see if I could get her in bed, basically. And of course I don't. But they liked it a lot, and they called me in to do Lex Luthor for a video game called DC Universe Online, which you can still play. And I started doing that Lex Luthor, and I hear they say, "Okay, cut. James, have you seen the artwork for the video game for Lex Luthor?" I'm like, "No. Could you come into the booth, please?" Come into the booth, and they show me Lex Luthor, and he's got massive body armor and rocket launchers on his shoulders, like, "Ah!" And I'm like, "Oh, butch it up?" And they're like, "Yes." So yeah, you gotta do that. Yeah.
So, let's see here. I've got a couple more questions for you, and then we'll pass it out to the audience here. So, you're a musician,
Yep.
and we all love you for that. It's amazing. Can you talk about how that affects your acting? Like, do you utilize your love of music and your ability to keep a tune, to find a beat? How does that affect your acting?
Oh, that's right. Good question. Normally. Hey guys. Are you signing?
They're signing.
You rock. You. Well, you know, like I said before, in film, you're trying to do things that you didn't plan on, and so when you watch yourself on film, you're like, I did that? You know, you're hoping for that. Music is a real taskmaster. If you get every note right, there's a spell that's cast and you can transport it. So you're not trying to do stuff you didn't plan. You're trying to keep to the plan, and it's very exacting. So it's very difficult. But I will say, I was doing, Flowers for, no, not Flowers for Algernon, The Importance of Being Earnest, by, God, is that
Oscar Wilde.
Huh? No,
Oscar Wilde.
Oscar Wilde, thank you.
We're horrible people that we forgot that. Oh my God.
I'd never done Oscar Wilde before, and we were doing a radio play of The Importance of Being Earnest, and we had 3 days to rehearse it, and then you go in front of a live audience and start recording it, and then you do 4 performances, and they cut out all the mistakes and put that on radio. So I realized that doing Oscar Wilde was a lot like doing music, and which is to say that if you do every inflection and every rhythm exactly like Oscar Wilde wants you to, and it's really clear what he wants, he gets the laughs for you. And you can be out in front of an audience, if you know the plan, you'd be like, and laugh now. And no, and now. And you can just push a button. It's amazing. But if you get one note wrong, it just falls apart. And it takes forever to get it back. So he's like the most exacting playwright I've ever dealt with. But it was a lot like music. Like if you're playing and you get one note wrong, the audience may not hate you, but they're like, oh, and then the spell is broken. And it takes a couple songs to get it back.
So my last question, of course, is you've worked on Torchwood and you've done a lot of Big Finish audios, which I love. Can you talk about working and being, Captain John Hart is just a fascinating character to me. I love him, not just because you make out with John Barrowman.
That was good.
I mean, that helps, but can you talk about creating that character and coming into this universe? Because we know you from Buffy, we know you've done all this work in DC, but Doctor Who is like a 50-plus year mythology. Can you talk about coming into that? And it sounds like you're actually a fanboy when it comes to this stuff.
Totally.
And I think that's great. So can you talk about becoming part of that?
Yeah, Russell T. Davies, who reawoken Doctor Who and who thought of Torchwood, he took me out to dinner when I got to Wales before we started shooting, and he explained that he was a Buffy fan and that this was his Buffy. And I didn't know what he meant by that. I didn't realize until I was doing an interview with the BBC, and the guy goes, "So, what do you think about the homophobic backlash against Torchwood?" And my response was, "We have a backlash?" and I realized that I had gotten onto another subversive television show. Like I ran a theater in Chicago and then one in Seattle, and we were subversive. Which is that when you're doing subversive art, you're not trying to make the audience angry, but when they get angry, it's working. Because you're trying to divest the audience of lies that we all get taught, usually in childhood, sometimes just by commercials and stuff. But some of the lies are you can buy happiness, or old people are boring. Buffy was subverting the lie that women can't fight back. And I couldn't believe my fortune when I met Joss Whedon and realized I was doing a subversive television show, because I thought that I was coming down to Los Angeles to sell myself out, turn my back on all of that, and just join the enemy because I was a new father and I had to actually make money, which you don't do in theater. So I really was comfortable with the idea that I was selling out, and I just lucked into the situation where I was doing subversive art again. And then I got on Torchwood, and it was even more in your face. Like, Torchwood is like, I'm gay, deal with it. I was just in heaven. And then when I found out that in England is not as homophobic as other places. They're actually pretty comfortable with it, but Torchwood pissed them off. So I was happy about that. And then the character John Hart was just, it was a lot like Spike, but stripped of all the angst. He doesn't, because Spike, once he got his soul, he had to deal with all the guilt of all the victims that he killed. And he was driven insane by that. So there's a lot of that angst. Then there was all the angst of being truly in love and having all the complications of that. And I was just like, what if you just take all that out and just have a great time just messing with it? Just ruin John Barrowman's day every day. And so, yeah, it was one of the most fun characters I've ever played.
Amazing. So before I hand it out to the audience, I have to share this with you and tell you this. You destroyed me when you hugged that cross and you made me cry.
Oh my gosh,
hard
yes.
When you did that scene. You destroyed me. So I have to tell you that. you've got me. I mean, and I think that scene is what got my husband to finally start watching Buffy. And he came down and he found me bawling my eyes out. And I said, what the hell are you watching? And I'm he's got a son, and she's a bitch. I don't care. So I just wanted to share that with you.
It's not my fault. That was Joss Whedon. Seriously, like we filmed that scene. There's a saying: if the actor cries, the audience can't. The actor has to hold back so the audience can have the experience. So we filmed that scene, and I was like, so emotional, you know. And Joss comes up a couple days later and he goes, "Okay, do you want the good news or bad news?" And I'm like, "Man, give me the bad news first. Otherwise, I'm just thinking about what the bad news is." He's like, "Okay, your scene sucked. It was absolutely unwatchable. What were you thinking? You're blubbering." Like, I was like, "Well, sad scene, man." And he goes, "Well, you want the good news?" And I'm like, "Yes." He said, I'm gonna fix it. I'm gonna save you. I'm gonna rewrite that scene because the writing actually wasn't really what you needed, and I'm gonna come in and direct that on the scene. And we're gonna save that. So, and on a television schedule and a television budget, that's a big ask. That's a big deal. And he did. He commandeered a half day and rewrote it and came in and directed it. And his direction was basically just like, right. Only a little bit, you know, and let the audience have the experience. And so he very specifically walked me through that scene, had a clear idea about what he wanted. So that was his fault.
You broke me. Just want you to know. All right, guys. So I'm going to pass it out to the audience. Raise your hands high. My beautiful assistant over here will get to you.
Hi.
So, just kind of wanted to ask, like, what was it like for you when you learned that you landed a part on Dragon Ball Super, since you're kind of a well-documented Dragon Ball fan?
Yeah. Back when I had hope that it would work. Yeah, I was over the moon. I just remember. Oh, the mic does work.
It does now. We're used to.
I remember going to the audition and just going like, "I will destroy you." The director was like, "That was awesome." And I thought maybe I was going to get the role, and then they cast me, and Dragon Ball helped me raise my son. We watched it together. Like at Toys R Us, it was like 10 plus, like don't let anyone below 10 watch this show. And he was 7 years old. But I was like, you know what, dude, if we watch it together and we can talk about what we see, then let's watch it together. And we started watching Dragon Ball, and I quickly kind of realized that, anyway, for me, Dragon Ball is a rumination on what it means to be a real man, which is to say, be like Goku. Be goofy, be humble, be peaceful. Like if you give Goku his choice, his perfect day is a big lunch and chasing butterflies with his kids, you know? But if you attack his family, you are dead. And that's, I think, a great kind of archetype for what a man is. And so it led to this really great conversation with me and my young son. And when I got the movie, I think Sullivan was 13, something like that. It was later on. But it was the only thing that he cared about. Like, he didn't care about Buffy. He didn't want to watch me fight people and stuff like that. But when I got Piccolo, he was like, "Yeah!" You know, we've been playing with the action figures for years, and he ripped off my arms 1,000 times. And then they told me that it was a $120 million budget, which is enough for that. You know, it's just enough to make it good. And that Stephen Chow.
Like, first of all, specifically the attack scene when you were doing the franchise. How on earth did you find it within yourself to pull that off? How did it affect you? And maybe if you know, how did it affect Sarah Michelle Gellar?
Yeah. That was the worst day of my professional life. I don't watch TV shows with those kind of scenes in them. I don't go to movies if I know that's coming on. If it surprises me on television, I have to turn it off. Like I'm filming a show now called Runaways, and the woman that plays my wife is also in Handmaid's Tale. And she was like, so have you seen Handmaid's Tale? And I'm like, well, I watched the pilot, but there was a rape, and I didn't watch it. And she's like, James, you do know I'm on that show. And I'm like, well, are there any episodes without so much rape in them? And she's like, no, it's pretty much all about that. I'm like, well,
It really is.
So I will refuse auditions for projects that have that in it. But with Buffy, I was contracted to do whatever they wanted me to do. I remember I was so freaked out that the first shot of this scene, I have a whiplash in my neck from too much stunts and getting mugged too many times. And it'll, if I get tense, it'll pop, and kind of like that. And it just, they said action, and it was the first time I said the first line of the first scene, and I went, Buffy, I'm gonna crack, and it just popped off worse than anything I've ever done. I just fell on the ground twitching, and Sarah was like, James, what's up? And it was a really horrible day, and it sent me into therapy, actually, which actually turned out to be a good thing, because I'm a much happier person than I was before. I remember going to Steve DeKnight, who wrote the script, and he was on set, and I just passed him, and I said, you know, sometimes you guys don't realize what you put us through. Like, we have to live this. You get to write it, but we have to actually live it. And in defense of the writers on that, the secret of Buffy writing, and I think the reason it connects so well, is that Joss was asking his writers to come up with their worst day. I've talked about this in Mind to some of you. Come up with a day that they can't talk about, the day that keeps them up at night, where they hurt someone and they regret it, or when they got so hurt that they can't talk about it, and then slap fangs on top of that, put a metaphor on